And okay, we're officially on. Welcome to today's workshop on community-based global learning, co-sponsored by Public Scholarship and Engagement and Global Affairs. This workshop is part of the curriculum enhancement through global learning opportunity, which is offered to our faculty by Global Affairs. I would like to start by introducing Dr. Tessa Hill, a professor in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences and the Bodega Marine Laboratory. Professor Hill, or Tessa, is part of the Bodega Ocean Acidification Research Group at Bodega Marine Laboratory, which aims to understand the impact of ocean acidification on native species. She leads an NSF-supported program with future pre-service K-12 science teachers to infuse their classrooms with climate change science, and an industry academic partnership to understand the consequences of ocean acidification on shellfish farmers. And she's also a fellow of the California Academy of Sciences and a panelist on the West Coast Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia panel. Dr. Tessa Hill, of course, is also the Associate Vice Provost for Academic Programs with Public Scholarship and Engagement at UC Davis. So we will turn it over to Tessa, and she will lead us through today's workshop.
Thank you so much for that lovely, lengthy introduction, Aliki. I really have appreciated working with you both, Aliki and Liz, in co-developing this workshop. The first thing I would like to do is just introduce my other two facilitators who are here helping us with the program today. So I'll do some short introductions, and then Ingrid and Patsy, if you'd like to add anything, you're welcome to. So Dr. Ingrid Behrsin is a provost postdoctoral scholar in the Office of Public Scholarship and Engagement. Ingrid's research expertise centers around energy, environmental justice, and policy. And as you'll see, she's a talented facilitator, thinker, and asker of questions, which you're going to see in just a moment. And we're also joined by Dr. Patsy Owens, who's a professor and associate dean in the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. And Patsy's work examines the role of the physical environment in the development, health, and well-being of youth, and methods of community engagement. Ingrid and Patsy, feel free to give us a wave and a hi and add anything you'd like to add.
It's wonderful to see many familiar faces and to meet some new folks today as well. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, and the same for me. It's really good to be here. I think, Ingrid, it was about this time last year. This was one of the last things we were able to do in person is having this meeting. And so it's not going to be quite the same, but looking forward to it. And as Tessa pointed out, you know, I'm not here really in my role as associate dean. I'm really here because I have done a lot of community engagement and facilitation of meetings and participatory kind of techniques. So great to see everyone.
Great. So just to orient you all, our goals for today are to introduce some basic components of community-based global learning, as well as some values that underpin that kind of engaged learning, and compare different approaches to community-based global learning. In the first hour, we will have a discussion where all of us get to actively participate. And in the second hour, we will have a panel here to speak with us, and I will introduce the panel at that time. I'd like to just remind you that much of our discussion is focused on a paper that we sent out in advance. And so I'm going to put that paper in the chat room so you can all open it up and have it handy. And I'm also going to encourage all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat box. So maybe put your name and your department or affiliation or your perspective in terms of joining this workshop. And as you do that, hopefully all of you will start typing into the chat box. I am going to hand off to Ingrid, who is going to bring us sort of our first activity for the workshop.
So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. There we go. Are you all seeing a Jamboard slide? Great. and I'm going to send you a link. It is Friday after all, so I thought the first thing we would do for those of you who have not played in Jamboard before is to get a little creative and to add some comments, some messiness, some responses to some of the lighthearted prompts that we put in this Jamboard slide. We'll be using this today for the next couple of minutes. So feel free to let us know what you had for lunch, or if you have a pet at home that is your companion this afternoon, or a two-legged companion that's in your space with you today, you can just start adding some fun notes to this space. I know we're asking you to multitask with both introducing yourselves and yay, whose pet is likely to join us today? Yes, whose pet is likely to join us today? Aliki, you had a furry companion with you earlier. Tiger?
So my screen just got with your screen, but there's nothing on it.
Yeah, Ingrid, the Jamboard disappeared from your screen share. So I think if everybody has opened up the Jamboard, they probably can see it.
Great. I'll stop my share then.
Great, yeah. So just make sure if you haven't yet, I would go up to that Jamboard link in
I see
the chat.
some art being added. Looks beautiful.
Yeah, I added Tiger's credentials in there.
Excellent. So this is Jamboard. Many of you may have used it already in your teaching over the past year. And for those of you who have not yet been introduced to it, then it's a fun tool to do some collaboration in an online forum like this. So we are going to just launch in right away and start discussing some definitions of community-based global learning, which is, after all, the theme of this workshop this afternoon. And we're using a pretty simple heuristic that was put forward in the Hartman et al. Paper that we circulated and that you should all have up and accessible right now. And the 7 core elements that Hartman et al. Outline in this introduction are community-based global learning should include community-driven learning and or service. Second, development of intercultural learning and cultural humility. The pursuit of global citizenship. Fourth, continuous and diverse forms of critically reflective practice. Fifth, interrogating power, privilege, and positionality. Sixth, deliberate and demonstrable learning. And 7, safe, transparent, and well-managed programs. So you'll find that on page 22 of the reading. And also if you go to the second frame in the Jamboard, that diagram is replicated there as well. So what we're going to do next is we'll shortly move you into a few breakout rooms where you'll have about 10 minutes to discuss some of the components of community-based global learning identified in this diagram. So there'll be a green room, a blue room, and a pink room. And the colors of your Jamboard slides should correspond to the room that you've been put in. So if you're looking at the Jamboard, slide 3 will be for the green room, slide 4 will be for the blue room. And if we have a pink room, then we'll have a slide 5 for that space. So within your rooms, the instructions are on the bottom of each of those frames, but we are asking you to spokesperson or a note taker, please use the sticky note function on your Jamboard frame. And with yellow sticky notes, we're asking you to share, just go around and informally share how you've interpreted these elements of the framework that are on your slide, and that will be reinforced on the slide that you're on. And secondly, how these concepts might spark ideas for course revisions. Nothing, no pressure, but just how has this opened up ideas for how you might revisit some of the teaching that you're doing. And please, again, note the color suggestions for your sticky notes. And after about 10 minutes, we'll come back and share back from each room what we have discussed. So choosing that spokesperson is please the first step. And one of us will be in each of the rooms, and we can go over these instructions again once we're in those rooms. Tessa, how is it going with the breakout rooms?
I think we're ready. There will be one group that may or may not have a facilitator. So hopefully you listen to Ingrid's instructions, but I'll drop in and see how you're doing. And I think we're ready to go.
Excellent.
Is everybody ready?
Thank you.
Okay. So you should now be able to accept a prompt to go into a breakout room.
I don't have a prompt. I think I got kicked out earlier again.
Okay, hold on. Let's see here. I can fix that. Oh, yep. Gotcha.
Thank you.
And so I'll hand back to Ingrid.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We're just going to quickly go through room to room and see what conversation themes emerged from that activity. So Liz, you are up.
Okay, should I share screen here so everybody can see what we did?
If folks just want to go to slide 3 of the Jamboard, I think we'll all be on the same place. Now we can see each other's faces at the same time that we're discussing.
I just put the link in the chat again for those of you who have joined more recently. So the Jamboard link should be waiting for you in the chat.
So we had just started getting into the meat of conversation, so I only have a few things to present. We had a couple of ideas. We had a couple of courses that, because Aliki and I are working on summer courses for global affairs, that we could immediately think of where would we put these in terms of what it is that we're hoping to accomplish. And Aliki was just doing course learning outcomes, and so was ready to put things into seeking global citizenship and really thinking about how our students need to think of themselves in relationship to the world, but that they can't do this unless they critically reflect upon what does that mean. Our second course, we're not nearly so far along. It's summer session 2, and it's looking at the SDGs, becoming a global collaborator. And so, yes, we will be doing critical reflection, but honestly, not quite sure where I would put it in the other areas. And then we started to take a look at the idea of cores of things that we want to instill in courses. And so Laura was talking about her SDG grant and how the activities in that SDG grant are things she'd like to embed within the curriculum. They're very community driven and community focused, I think is probably the best way to put it, Laura, and you can smack my hand if I've got that wrong. So thinking about how would you embed this into the nursing curriculum? And then Susanna was talking about the teaching teachers and how do we think about the impact of movement and art in a more global sense and not just in a local sense. And so again, I have put that in something that is community-based, but Susanna, you may actually ask me to push it somewhere else because that's then when we got kicked out. So.
In the interest of time, I think we're going to move to the blue room. Is there a spokesperson who'd be willing to share what was discussed there?
And I tried to take notes, but we were also not getting too far. But yeah, we all put in some notes. So we discussed the first concept of interrogating power, privilege, and positionality. And Gordon shared how in the health care sector, students need to be aware where power imbalance exists and privilege and how this affects people's access to healthcare, and how students can be empowered to be leader in fixing these things. And then we had some things from gender studies examples from those courses, how if you name something or give somebody a name, that's already an indicator of power, and then that you can discuss this and recognize this in the classroom, and how you could also specifically in a classroom setting, discuss the power imbalance that exists between instructor and student. Yeah, and for healthcare, we had leadership skills. Yeah, if somebody wants to chime in, please. Yeah, and leadership skills for the courses. Yeah, we didn't have ideas for the other courses yet, but for the second concept, we discussed the deliberate and demonstrable learning, that it needs that learning is a multi-dimensional thing, that it is a conscious thing, that people and students learn from each other. The professor also learns from the students from the professor. So it's a collective happening, a collective activity, and also influenced by cultural experience. Yeah, Gordon, I'm not quite sure, or we hadn't discussed that, but how, yeah, or this seems like a learning experience. The second posted that students get clinical experiences to expose them to different cultures and belief systems. And number seven, concept number seven, safe, transparent, and well-managed programs. So there is a big logistics aspect to it, but then from a course perspective, also grading transparency, thinking about cultural differences, and setting transparent goals was discussed. But please,
Excellent.
other members of the room.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Want to add?
Maybe one more addition if there's someone else in the blue room who wants to add something. Otherwise, we can move to the pink room.
Well, I think that a lot of this stuff, and particularly the first one, the addressing power and privilege, and really the key to that is the imbalance in those things, rather than their existence. And it's a huge thing in healthcare, both here and in other parts of the world. And locally, probably one of the places it shows up the most is when we've got people that don't understand our healthcare system. They are new immigrants from somewhere, whether they're refugees or even well-educated and well-off economically, but they still don't understand our system. And one of the things that we have to do as healthcare educators is to make sure that our students are aware of those situations, are able to identify them, and then have some tools to be able to address that so that they can help people learn to navigate and overcome, to the extent that we can as providers at the bedside with our patients, some of these imbalances, and then also to take a leadership role in coming up with solutions. And that is an existing aspect of our curriculum in the School of Nursing right now.
Thank you so much for underscoring that, Gordon. That was great. And pink room, let's move to slide 5. And if the spokesperson from that breakout group would share what was discussed there, that'd be great.
Okay, so the pink room, we had several concepts. We didn't actually get as far as discussing any course ideas, so maybe in the next breakout we'll do that. But so we stayed more in the conceptual realm. So for the first one, community-driven service and/or learning, I think there was one really important point here about how the question comes from the community, or the focus comes from the community, and it's also a form of learning or engagement that helps us to step outside of ourselves and understand the experience of another in service to another, but also in a way that's mutually beneficial, kind of the idea of something benefiting both parties that are involved. And then on the second concept of intercultural learning and cultural humility, the idea of empathy, I think, was an important one, learning how to listen to the experience of another. And then the other point that's here, I'm not sure how easy it is to do, having unbiased viewpoints and not acting superior to others. And then the third concept, global citizenship, seeking global citizenship, is about considering one's own place in the world, having discussions, and when you're having them, considering the broader impacts of those discussions. And again, kind of living one's life in service, not only to other humans, but also to the planet as well. And then on the last concept about critically reflective practice, we had what do our decisions mean to others? So kind of thinking about our own decisions. As experiences happen, taking time to think through one's own thoughts, actions, and perspectives throughout the experience. And then lastly, asking questions that sometimes make us uncomfortable and force us to question our own assumptions about the world.
Thanks, Michael.
I don't know if others wanted to add in anything.
No, that's great. Thanks, Michael, for jumping in.
Sure.
Perfect. I'm always happy when the prompts generate more discussion than we have time for. So thank you all. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Patsy, who is going to facilitate a conversation that expands on what we've been doing in our breakout rooms.
So Ingrid, do you want to share the Jamboard with the next slide? Maybe instead of having everyone trying to juggle their screen, I think that might be helpful.
Okay.
So we wanted to just take a little bit of time, and I know our group, and it sounds like the others as well, immediately we want to go to what does this mean, right? What does this mean to how we teach and to the things that we want to do in our own work? Hold on a second. Everything disappeared. And so we're going to have, but this is going to be as a group. We're not going to do little breakouts. And so we're going to be trying to focus on this, but we really wanted to circle back to these global learning outcomes that you should all be familiar with, right, through global affairs, and spend a little bit of just talking about what these each are, and then how these strategies really relate to your courses. And here we're not just talking about some kind of, summer abroad course or international course that you're doing, but this can relate to your courses that are happening on campus as well. If you go back and look at your homework, look at the article, it's the idea about global learning is not just applied for international programs, but it can also be applied to work that we're doing in all of our courses. So the idea of global awareness, right? That we are learning about those interrelationships between our own experiences, right? These personal experiences that we have and things happening out in the world. And it's also, the objective is trying to increase the awareness of these really complex overlapping concerns and systems. And whether that's the systems we're working in, thinking about biological or physical systems or human systems, but it's really how that dynamic of how we all know, right, can get very complicated. And so maybe I'll go through the three, and then we'll come back and spend some time having we have the next page on the Jamboard, we can start adding some notes to that. The second idea is global diversity. How do we build skills within our students to really thinking about how do we engage with and learn from differing perspectives and experiencing while we still keep that cultural humility. Understanding how our backgrounds and how we are situated in the world, how they inform and limit our knowledge, and that there's different ways that these dimensions can really influence these decisions. And here I'll just give an example of a student I had that was working with a group of Hmong women, and it was for a community garden project in Sacramento. And everything had gone really well, and lots of people showed up to the meeting and wanted to participate. But then when she asked for volunteers to take on different tasks, no one would volunteer. And she found out through the interpreter that in the Hmong culture, it's frowned upon to volunteer. You do not put yourself forward. If you are asked to do it, then they would be glad to do it, right? So having that understanding that the world doesn't operate necessarily how we think it operates, and thinking about those kind of situations is really important. And then global actions, right? Thinking about all the different ways that we can contribute to society, whether that's locally, nationally, globally, that it fits into different scales, and how we can help our students understand those things and how we can have positive impacts. And then getting them to be able to, allowing them to apply that knowledge and skills to address these real life kind of problems. And so I think we want to, I don't know how we are on time, but we want to take time now to actually think about these, and maybe we can probably go to the next slide. I think on the Jamboard is a blank slide, and we can start putting up some of your ideas in that, right? So how might you incorporate this community-based global learning into your course? You know, what are some things, if you think about these three objectives, right? Global awareness, global diversity, and global action. What are some things that come to mind when you think about your own teaching and how it can inform your teaching? And please draw from examples, you know, things you've already learned, things you've already tried, or anything new that you're toying with, you know, things that you're thinking about maybe you want to do. And then is Ingrid available, or Tessa, should you?
Yeah, I was about to pop in. So you're welcome to add stickies on the Jamboard, or you could put things in the chat if you don't feel like using the Jamboard. And also we have the time, if people just feel like talking about this a little bit, feel free to just speak up. It's a small enough group.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about this, I think we can have a few minute discussion about it.
I'd like to give a shout out to my colleague from the School of Nursing, Laura Van Acker, and a program that she came up with as nutrition, and it focused on developing awareness on managing iron deficiency anemia in women, which is a widespread health issue, but specifically in the cultural differences in diet and dietary practices. And it was a really rich experience, and this year I was happy to be part of this. We were able to leverage our student population because we have a very diverse cohort in our nurse practitioner and physician assistant class this year, and actually get students who are either immigrants or first generation from a variety of different cultures to talk about that. So Laura, I'm going to hand it to you. I mean, you can kind of, it was an extremely effective tool and generated a lot of comment from our students.
Yeah, that's a great idea, right? Building upon what the students already know and sharing with that with others. Yeah.
Well, it was particularly real because we asked for volunteers from that culturally diverse. We have a cohort of 85 students, so a very large percentage are culturally diverse. And last year we did it just by identifying populations locally at the health department where our students do some of their practice. This time, by using the students within the classroom, it was so deep, so rich, and so relevant that because people were talking about the difference when they came to this country versus food insecurity because of lack of knowledge. And so it was a much richer built on top of the first one. So each year it seems to be getting a little bit better. So looking at ways to expand that to other content areas. And with a tip of the hat to Francine in the dietary nutrition, I use competencies from nutritional counseling, cultural nutritional counseling from dietary science, and infused that into the nursing department. And so that was a reflection of she and I having a prior association.
Great, thank you.
And those are great ideas. And even if we can't always in our nutrition classes get students to talk from their own experience to begin with, what we sometimes do in our case studies is very intentionally across the semester develop case studies with unique individuals and cultural backgrounds embedded in them, such that the primary objective is the nutritional analysis of things, but to be culturally appropriate and have cultural humility, they have to consider the context of that individual, whether it be an individual from another country, or if they're food insecure, or whatever it might be. And so we try to embed situational context that the students have to identify and then be able to discuss. So that's another approach. I love to be able to have the unique, authentic experiences of each individual. But if you can't always accomplish that, at least intentionally building it into case studies is another approach too.
So I think Young has a question, but I just want to follow up. Could you explain how you require them, or do you give them guidance as far as how you ask the students to think about?
Yep. So, right. So we ask leading questions that they would have to either go and learn a little bit about the culture or the religious practice, such as identifying how counseling an individual with diabetes during Ramadan. They'd have to be able to understand and know that they fast during the day, and how would that impact their nutritional management. And so that types of thing, as well as other sort of community-based, whether it's individual or community-based, they would need to understand context and be able to either respond to general discussion questions or in writing when they're turning in answers to case studies.
Great, thanks. So is it Ga Young?
Yeah, it's Ga Young. I was going to reply to Tessa's question from the chat. Is that okay?
Oh yes, that is the question, yeah.
Thanks. So once in my class, Asian American youth, the theme was youth labor in the globe. So I asked my students to do some photo voice projects using some products, commodity that they are having near them. And surprisingly, many of my students took some pictures of the chocolate, their clothing from H&M and Zara, and also iPhone, Apple related products. And they were able to realize how some of young people or teenagers involved in creating those products. And then with the photo voice and their storytelling, I encouraged them to do some group projects as a social media campaign. So they created some web flyer and they distributed using their Instagram and Facebook account. So I believe that helped us do some action-based activities that are related to global awareness and global action.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for bringing up that point, because I think that's something that we all know as educators, right? That people learn differently, right? We have visual learners, we have people that learn by hearing things, but we also have people that want to engage in different ways and thinking about different kinds of methods and how you might incorporate different methods for different people that have different comfort levels. I think that's really good. I do a lot of my research is actually with teenagers. And so we do a lot of photography and using phones and things like that as well, right? Because that's something they're comfortable with. Many of them are comfortable with. Other ideas, other things that you've done, thinking about, community-based global learning in the classroom? Ways you're helping your students think about that?
This is an activity that's a little bit outside the classroom, but we are actually going to be requiring our students to participate in this. For those of you who aren't familiar with kind of what's going on, we are in the process of launching a new doctoral program in the School of Nursing, a Doctor of Nursing Practice degree, and that'll be a brand new project starting just over a year from now. The first class will start in summer of 22. And one of the things that we're going to require them to do is to participate in a program that is run by Dr. Jan Murray Garcia, which is the Central Valley bus trip. And some of you may have participated in this, but it's where a bunch of us, students, faculty, community members, all get on a bus, and it's been historically drive down the Central Valley, down into the Fresno area, stopping and interacting with a variety of different things. I don't want to go into tremendous detail, but it's a chance for people to get some firsthand experience with the different cultures and different things that are going on in the valley. We're looking at expanding it to go into, I say we because I've been asked to help with this, into the North Valley, into the Sacramento Valley up towards Redding. But what it does, and I was just typing a note on this, and it places the students and the participants in a little bit of an uncomfortable situation because they're not familiar with the environment they're in, whether it's the culture, the language, or some other thing like that. And what it does is it makes them appreciate, and we need to point out to them that this is what's occurring, that they are in the role of the other, the outsider, the one who doesn't understand the world that they are finding themselves in. And particularly for our healthcare students and our advanced practice students is then to extrapolate that into the fact that they're going to be taking care of patients who that is the world they live in. They're someplace strange, they don't understand, they don't know who to ask, they don't know what to ask. And if they can kind of internalize that sense a little bit, it gives them a little more empathy and understanding, I believe anyway, of what their patients are going through. So it's something that exists in the system already, but we're going to be leveraging it as a part of our curriculum. Exactly how it's going to tie in is still being worked out, but that's a big thing. And it also, I may be stating the obvious, but some of you may or may not be aware of this, but the term cultural humility derives from a paper that was written a number of years ago by Dr. Garcia. So Jan is the source of that concept in our awareness of cultural interaction. So we're really lucky that she's a part of our faculty because we leverage her a lot. And this is only one example, but it's things that are already going on within our university system that we can take and use in particular classes that I think can have a huge impact. That's kind of one of the concepts on that. So I'll put my note up on the wall.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Gordon. I really appreciate you sharing that. Laura.
Yeah, real quick. The School of Medicine, School of Nursing does interprofessional activity that embraces much of this around the SDGs. And the very first session is traditionally a heritage meal in that the students from the different programs between the two schools actually come with a food from their heritage. And what is so nice about that is it's a point of cultural pride for people to share what their family is about. But it also creates this message of, unless you're Native American, everybody is from elsewhere. And that you should start as understanding that this global citizenship and that the global citizenship is here too. And so that's a really rich experience. And to lessen the burden, people are told you can go just buy it and bring it here, but some choose to cook it in the tradition of their family. And that's just really something that students point out repeatedly. And actually in that active learning session that I did around cultural food counseling, at the end of that, when we were still in session before last year, we ended with having high iron foods from the 3 ethnic cultural groups that we were focusing counseling on that reflected local healthcare needs here. And so it seems like when you step out of the traditional classroom thinking and infuse food and culture, it's fun and it's deeply appreciated.
I love that idea, calling it the heritage meal. I think it's just really wonderful. And I think it also highlights the point that we do need to make sure that we acknowledge and that we understand all of us, right, have something to bring to the discussion, right? And so as far as our students, that we're not just making them say, oh, well, you have to be more sensitive to others, that we actually experience that by being more sensitive to them as well. So I really hate to cut the discussion short. This is really wonderful. I'm hoping maybe all the participants will continue to have access to the Jamboard, because I think there's so much that's been added there. And I think folks are probably going to think of other things after this day. And you can go back in and use this as a way to just keep having a conversation with each other. So thank you. So I think we have a little stretch break, right?
Yeah.
So here.
Thank you so much, Patsy, for leading that discussion. And if we have time, actually, we're going to come back to that reflection question on the Jamboard one more time. But we did, in the interest of best practices in Zoom meetings, we planned in a stretch break. So we all now get 3 minutes to fill up your coffee mug or get up and stretch a little bit and then come back. And when you come back, we will be starting our panel discussion. So be back in 3 minutes.
So unless somebody has issues, I'm going to copy the comments and put them in.
Okay. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce our guest panel who is here for the next part of our discussion. And I think they're all here and they're all ready. So I will introduce them. We get to hear from 4 experts with interesting perspectives on community engaged global learning. Dr. Paulina Carmona Mora is a biochemist working on gene regulation in human disease. She also has extensive experience in mentoring and science diplomacy around the world. Dr. Natalia Deeb Sosa is a professor in our Chicano Studies department. She has a book on community-based participatory research and how it has been used to create sustainable change around the world. Dr. Jonathan London is here. He is an associate professor in the Department of Human Ecology, and he's also the faculty director of the Center for Regional Change. His research addressed conflicts and collaboration in environmental management, as well as environmental justice in rural communities. And we have Dr. Keith Wattenpaugh. He is a professor and director of human rights studies at UC Davis. He's the founding director of the Human Rights Studies program, the first academic unit of its kind in the University of California system. And his team developed and deployed the Article 26 backpack, the universal human rights tool for academic mobility. The way we're going to do this panel is I have a couple questions prepared that I will ask the panel, starting with an introductory question that they can all answer, and then a couple extra questions that they can sort of choose to answer if they wish, in any order that they wish. And then we'll open it up to the full group to have all of you ask them questions. You're welcome to post your questions in the chat or hold them until the end of those first 3 questions, and we'll just do an open discussion. So thank you so much for joining us, expert panelists. The first thing I'd like to do is just create some space for you to tell us about your experience in global learning and community engaged learning. And you're welcome to go in any order. So whoever's ready to answer that question.
I can go, Tessa. Can I share the screen though? I have a picture I wanted to.
That's going to take me a second, Keith. So maybe we have Natalia or Jonathan or Paulina go while I figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah, so I want to start by thanking everybody for inviting me here, and also saying that I am originally from Chibcha land. I am from Bogota, Colombia. I'm a political refugee, and also doing a land acknowledgement, taking some time to acknowledge the indigenous land where you all are, and acknowledge that UC Davis is on or what originally was Patwin land. So I am not at all, I would not consider myself an expert on community based learning. I am, as having community humility, I think I am constantly learning from my students and learning every single day how to be a better academic, a better teacher, and I'm constantly learning from my students. So I want to go from that position that I do not consider myself an expert by any means, and I'm here to learn from all of you. And so I want to start from there. So my experience is that many of our students in Chicana studies are themselves coming from Mexico, from Central America, from South America, or even here in the US, have families who are mixed status, have different kinds of combinations. And how do we honor, how do we give them voice? How do we make sure that they understand that at especially predominantly white university, their experience matters. The university is trying to become a Hispanic serving university institution, and it is also should become an APISI, what we call a Pacific Islander, Asian Pacific Islander, but it's not trying to be. But although we have a huge amount, an enormous amount of students that are already in that designation. So I say this because it is important to acknowledge that our students are already very diverse. They come from very diverse communities. And so how do we make sure that in our classes, they feel reflected in the curriculum? And that's what I feel I should be constantly doing, honoring that. So I will stop there.
Shall I go? Or are you still getting the picture up for
Go for it, and then Keith can go after you.
Okay, great. So thank you, Tessa, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to be here and share my experience. So the thing I'll focus on most today is a program that I developed with my colleague and partner, Dr. Nancy Erbstein, who's in the School of Education, and it's a international, intercultural, and interdisciplinary learning exchange in Nepal. It's called Community, Technology, and Sustainability. And it's a seminar abroad program, which takes place in our case during the winter break. And preceded by a fall seminar. So this seminar abroads are useful in a lot of different ways. One is that they're accessible to students who wouldn't ordinarily be able to go on study abroad. So they're less expensive, they're shorter. So we have international students, transfer students, low-income students, athletes, all for whom being able to be away for a quarter or summer is just, it's not affordable financially or in terms of time. This is a program that has a dual enrollment of UC Davis students and Nepalese university students. So they work virtually during the fall quarter, learning about each other, building teams, also developing project plans. It's a project-based learning program. So they develop project plans to work on projects that have been identified by leaders in a small village that we've worked with over a number of years. It's called Machaputre in the foothills of Nepal. And so these are projects that can range from redesigning a birth and delivery room in a local health post to designing or helping people who are already developing a homestay program for traditionally marginalized castes, to developing a culture and history museum with a mothers group who want to both share their knowledge with tourists and also the younger generation to help them develop a continued sense of identity. So we have the students develop these plans, go to Nepal, and always run into the fact that they have to drastically change their plans. And one of the key things that they've learned is cultural humility. And we do have them read Jan and her partner Melanie Tervalon's article that really sticks with them, as well as just the sense of needing to be humble and change and not think you can come in as the expert, coming from UC Davis, from the United States, to, or in the case of our Nepali students, coming from urban university settings into a rural village and just tell the local folks what they should do, or share your expertise and have them be eternally grateful for how smart you are. But really much more being partners and learning from and with the people in the community and being of best help that they can be over the admittedly short time that they have to work together. So that's kind of the outlines of the project. I will say we call it a culture cafe, which is sort of like the heritage meal that the students really love. We have ministers. We have a set of ministers. There's a minister of time, happiness, and health, each of those three, and they sort of monitor the mood and the well-being of the group. There's a group journal for reflection, and then every evening they have a collective reflection. So it's really this kind of comprehensive, deep, immersive, experiential model of education. I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Paulina or Keith, would you like to go?
I think Keith had the presentation ready, or
okay.
Keith,
go for it. Would you like to share screen, and then we'll come back to Paulina.
Thank you.
You're muted.
Being muted and talking takes me back to those first heady days of the pandemic. I want to thank Tessa and Ingrid for inviting me. I had a really wonderful 6 months with them as a public, as a fellow in the public engagement program this last year, and I learned a great deal, and also sort of gained a great deal of sustenance from the relationships that I built, including with Ga Young, who's here. It's so wonderful to see her, and also to I think share this podium, if you will, with 3 other truly gifted and engaged leaders in engaged and global learning. I also want to recognize that one of the people who's really been helping me in all these projects is Michael Lazara, and of course the helpful leadership of Joanna Rogulska. So as many of you know, have heard me talk before, I'm really driven by this desire to end war. This is what I've set out to be my life's goal, is to end war and using human rights and the right to education, human rights education, to create a better world where war does not take place. But as part of that, and after many years of working to conducting research on the impacts of the Syrian civil war and the Iraqi and the U.S. invasion of Iraq on civil society and higher education, I worked with a group of colleagues to develop what's called the Article 26 Backpack, which is named for the 26th article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that tells us that we all have the right to education. And so we developed this way for refugee young people to safely and securely store, share, curate, and build community around Backpack. Safely store, slow down, Dr. Walker. Safely store, share, curate, and their critical academic documents and their sort of digital identity, so that they don't get lost or stolen, or they can also get access to their documents and continued access to their documents, even if their own governments begin to prevent their access to those documents. And we see this as a critical way to make sure that refugee young people are able to continue moving forward, both into higher education, but also into forms of advanced training. And this project has really challenged me to think about who I am as an educator, and really began to come to this realization that if we really want to, if we're really committed to community-based global learning, that we have to be willing to imagine ourselves as educators beyond borders. That our job is not just to teach within the walls of UC Davis, but to look for opportunities to expand that education, the knowledge, the training, and the connections that we can make with young people around the world. And I wanted to illustrate this with a couple of photographs. This is us and our team working in Beirut, where we're working with young interns from the refugee young people who are interns at the American University in Beirut, the Lebanese American University, but also collaborating with UC Davis undergraduates who are engaged in global learning, in helping a group of young people in Tripoli in northern Lebanon open their backpacks and fill them. And then this is where I'm going to go in about 40 minutes. And this is an ongoing project that we have at UC Davis. These are our backpack interns who, in the face of the pandemic and our inability to effectively travel, have begun to develop ways for us to extend backpack to half a dozen different refugee situations across the world. And Backpack is available in 5 different languages, Afghan, Persian, Arabic, French, Spanish, and English. And this has been I've been able to recruit through human rights studies. Our program enrolls about 1,000 students a year. Students who have an incredible interest in those parts of the world, especially those with language capacity. So they're in the process right now of developing ways for us to expand Backpack into these various other parts of the world. And they're having to do so using their language skills, but also in the process, actively learning about the barriers to education, the difficulties faced by refugee and other displaced populations around the world. So our next project is in Rwanda, but we have ongoing work in Colombia, in Hong Kong, and Afghanistan. So let me end there and stop sharing the screen.
Thank you so much, Keith. And now we hand to Paulina.
Hi, everyone. So, well, first of all, really happy actually to have been able to listen to all the panelists before and to hear the breakout room discussions and in general, because I'm excited as part of UC Davis. I'm not faculty, I'm project scientist in neurology, and I'm so excited to see that there is this willingness, you know, to have, to create the experience of global citizenship and expand it to everyone in our community. And that is very exciting to me as a person that I'm not from the US, I'm originally from Chile. And my experience in global learning has been, first of all, personal. I left Chile 12 years ago to come and work in Florida and research. And then I moved to Australia to do my PhD. And then I came here for my postdoc, and I still don't live, which is kind of a record in one country, but who knows? And then it's kind of more a discovery. I never had as an undergrad the experience of having any type of global learning, nothing, like zero interactions at all. I was in the south of Chile, and then out of my own curiosity, I started, you know, moving and finding that my skills were useful regardless the place where I was. So with that, I felt that more empowered and that I needed to teach that. And I started volunteering in a nonprofit that is called Ekpapalek, and we do mostly professional development programs for Latin American students and young professionals, people that never had anyone in, for example, a lot of people from Peru told me, I love neuroscience, but I never had a lecture. We don't have neuroscience in my university. And I tried to make the bridge and show them that they can go abroad and pursue studies and help them with applications, CV, and also all that kind of personal journey of empowerment, that it's like a cultural thing, right? You can do it, you're a woman and you can do it by yourself. Or it doesn't matter if your family doesn't understand what is science, like you can do it, you can apply, or your skills can be useful in another place too. So I feel all that empowerment made me feel, you know, that I can continue being the bridge between people. And then I started to work with undocumented students here, that it's another type of mentoring. I can't tell them go to the world because, you know, they have their own issues to take care of in terms of immigration. Also refugee scientists that are even older than me, that they used to have even professor positions, for example, in Syria, and now they are starting from scratch in a new country. So in all that journey, I discovered science diplomacy, and I don't know how I never heard about it before. And then I joined another big community that is the Global Young Academy, and we have projects in science diplomacy. And I was able also to have a grant now that I can couple my work as project scientist in neurology with Uzbekistan. And this is a grant from the American Council for Higher Education that I actually got the notification in the newsletter from Global Affairs to apply, and is in between these partnerships between Central Asia and the US, and the embassy from the US and the State Department are very timely incorporated in this project, and they actually funded this for having more interaction. So in this case, this is science for diplomacy. We don't really have so many relationships in general with Uzbekistan or other countries in Central Asia. And I found that quite interesting. So I think I'm pursuing more and more that kind of path where I'm a scientist in molecular genomics, and I have nothing to do, with social sciences or other sciences that have the opportunity to actually reach nations and have international projects. It was more like a personal curiosity, and now I can prove, that somebody in a lab can actually make the connection and can have the global learning experience for people in the lab or for people on the other side.
It's really wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Pauline. I was seeing lots of nodding heads. Okay, panel, in the interest of time and also just thinking about what all of you shared with us, for right now, I'm going to skip my second question. We might come back to it, but I'm going to go straight to the third question that I posed to you. So I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts that you'd like to share about how you've approached the ethical dimensions of this work, including colonialism and racism.
Can I start?
Yes, please.
So I feel like as an outsider in my comfortable position as someone that came to this country, my first shock was the lack of cultural awareness, I have to say it, and cultural humility that I haven't seen in Florida when I was there before, that I haven't seen in Australia. There was zero interest in knowing what was my previous work. Usually when you hire a postdoc, for example, here at the university, you invite them, they give talks, they have meetings with everyone. So it's kind of, you create the environment to make everyone decide if it's the right fit or not for the science they want to pursue. In my case, no one was ever interested in learning about my previous work. And if I ever had some successful trials and experiments and new skills that I was learning, it was because I made my PhD in Australia. So there was always a disregard, of who I was. And I always think that the most of who I am as a professional is what I acquired in my undergrad back in Chile. And that was quite shocking. And it's still quite shocking to see, that society is changing here, is more awake, and we are featuring more diversity in science, but we're still are not in that momentum where we are able to open this discussion for everyone, except, obviously everyone is here for a reason that they really want to take this forward. But I feel like still in our community in the university, a lot of lack of cultural humility and cultural awareness. And it's a pity because we have a diverse community that we should harness.
Oh. Keith.
So we're working primarily with, I'm having our students work primarily with vulnerable populations, refugees, and other forms of displaced peoples, right? And so this occasions conversations about sort of do no harm principles in international humanitarian work, which I think are really fundamentally important in this case. But it also then leads us to be able to talk about other issues, including, for example, this notion of parachuting in that some of you who are engaged in community projects will know about, which is where you just sort of, we know what the problem is, we're gonna jump in, we're gonna solve it, and then we leave. So instead, we talk about trying to build long-term relationships and community around these things, and that includes an emphasis on my part of insisting on opportunities to create friendship across the boundaries of space. And this is a very important feature of contemporary humanitarianism, which is thinking not just about professional relationships, but also about how you can create mutual respect and friendship. I just lost one of my earphones. I think you can hear me though still. So the other is that this also gives us an opportunity to think about historical problems in humanitarian action and thought, most especially what we call the white savior complex, which there was this phenomenon where young people would go do a project so they could get the selfie and so on. And we try to avoid that as much as possible by emphasizing sort of listening, empathy, and respect in our work. But it's interesting. I mean, in the areas that we're working, are all areas of decolonization, and the residual impact of that is something that our students are able to understand as they think about these projects.
I'll go. I was actually typing a response to Gordon's excellent question in the chat about the problem of short-term projects. So I'll just say it verbally here. So one of the things that we take really seriously is this kind of framework of decolonizing study abroad, decolonizing international education, and recognizing therefore that that has been a colonization and sort of built on a colonial model. Some of what Keith was saying of sort of the parachute in, the great white savior, even if it's not white, it's coded white. And so how do you decolonize? So one of the things is try to make it not just white, first of all. And so our cohorts in the class, partly because it's less expensive, and it's really geared to really trying to attract a diverse group. We've been really pleased with having our cohort be incredibly diverse. Also having a Nepalese cohort, so it's really, these are teams, these are international teams, not just the UC Davis students parachuting in, but really creating these binational partnerships, and then also working on projects that really are identified by the local community, that are going to bring value to them, but also are right size. So we're not setting up, unrealistic expectations that the students can't possibly meet. So it's kind of trying to find that, that Goldilocks sweet spot. The other thing is just returning to the same village year after year. And I have to say, amongst many, many problems with COVID, it's really a heartache that we can't go back this year and probably not next year. And because when we left, we said, we'll be back in 2 years. And so it's a challenge, but that's been our commitment, to be able to return and continue that relationship. So that, that gives us some solace about shifting from that colonial model. The other thing is that we've worked really hard to have our Nepalese class be very diverse, because we can pick them. We can't pick our study abroad group here. They're just first come, first serve. But there we have like over 100 applicants for about 15 slots. And we select based on gender and caste and class and language and geography, other kinds of background, disciplinary backgrounds. So, and then the projects that we do in the village are also really trying to make sure that we're covering, a wide range of the ethnic and caste and class backgrounds. So it's not just working with the elites, which is sort of another key model of colonialism and structural racism.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah, Natalia, please.
Yeah, thank you. I will try to kind of answer to some of the things that everybody has said. So responding to something that Paulina said before is, I think one of the, and I don't have I don't take students abroad. Most of the things I do is very local, is in Yolo County. And so for me, as this idea that how do we create a global citizen, somebody that is culturally competent, very locally here right? And I think is, so I think one of the things that I am very aware is that our students are not taught ethnic studies, are not taught diverse histories. And even with the word American, we are American, not recognizing that America is a continent, it is not a country. All of that are things that we examine in my classes. And what does that mean? Another thing is the history of what happened in, for example, in Colombia, in Central America, and how is the US foreign policy implicated in different countries, and why is it that people are migrating? Why is it that they're refugees? And that is important as well. Another thing to talk about, Gordon's question, is professors, even though they don't go abroad, they're already doing this very short time projects for the students, even very locally. They send them to, for example, go to Woodland and interact with somebody that is different from your race and ask them a question without really considering what are the implications that there's not follow through. How is it going to benefit a person because you ask them a question? And that is something that for me is very troublesome, especially given that UC Davis is the second first ag institution. And I know Patsy has done great work in a community that has my heart, that is Knights Landing, but they were severely impacted by some work being done before, and they themselves told me that they were treated as guinea pigs. And so how do we challenge that kind of work that is being done even locally? Right, that there's no follow through. And many professors are doing that locally in the 30-mile radius, 10-mile radius. And I think that that is something that we need to be aware of. And lastly, I think that for me, how I navigate that is with this new concept of ethical validity. Our methods are only valid if they emerge from the community, if they are good with the community we are immersed in. Thank you. I'm sorry I took so long.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Natalia. I think I will actually open it up to the group for questions right now. And I do have one last question I could ask the panel if we have time, but I want to preference all of your questions too. So you're welcome to raise your hand or throw a question into the chat. And Ingrid, is there a question in the chat right now that we should start with?
There is. Barbara, do you want to state your question yourself, or shall I read it?
I mean, it's mainly the idea of funding, especially if there's travel involved, because we also want to engage the low-income UC Davis students. How can they participate? Do you have funding to send students abroad, or do they have to come up? Or yeah, how are some of your programs funded?
Thanks.
Any panel member is welcome to address that.
So our program is fee-based. The students pay just sort of an at-cost fee, just their own airfare and on-the-ground expenses. There's a small fee that goes to global affairs. We also do. We also fund the Nepalese university students from the UCD funds, but it's a relatively inexpensive program, partly because on-the-ground costs are modest in Nepal, but also they don't have to pay any additional tuition. All the credits that they get are accrued from their fall, enrollments. So there's no additional, no additional tuition, so that the cost can be kept more modest that way as well. And there is financial aid, and Joanna probably knows a lot more about that than I do. But students can apply for financial aid, and it does carry over. The campus financial aid does, and Global Affairs has its own financial aid programs.
I'll jump in and say there are also awards and scholarships that we have, and students can apply for those. And we do several workshops and have a comprehensive website to let students know of these opportunities.
Laura, go for it.
Yeah, we're School of Nursing. We are new at trying to actually access international experience as a part of our curriculum. So it's tied specifically to a course. We're also a self-funded school, and so we don't have some of the same mechanisms that, I mean, we're going to tap all that we can, but we're in the process of trying to get this international activities going. And one of the things that kind of came from our marketing person is accessing the UC Davis crowdfunding, because she has alumni who are very much interested in funding international experiences for our students through global health activity. So that was something that I wouldn't have come up with, but came from within kind of this crowdfunding that we're looking at. And we were going there last year, but we had to suspend it because of the pandemic. But we look at accessing that as kind of a different alternative funding source.
And if I make a plug for the student-run clinics, I think that that's a wonderful experience for undergrads, for medical students, and perhaps for the nursing if they already don't have a connection with the student-run clinics.
No, we're already doing that all the time.
Okay. Great, because
Yeah.
I think that, you know,
I'm sorry, I was just going to say that that is such a strong local, global experience. It's a requirement of our students to be involved in those, but also through the Health Department Refugee Clinic, and also a variety of, excellent source.
Great. We might have to tap you for the Knights Landing One Health Center. We're always looking for more, so that would be great.
Please reach out. I think both of us would be interested in that from the School of Nursing. So,
Another question for the panel?
I have kind of a sensitive question. Sometimes when you partner with international organizations, they are faith-based groups, and that may help you with some of your transportation, housing, access for us health clinics. And some of the beliefs are sometimes not tolerant of students who, gender identify differently. And I'm trying to reconcile, I work within a group that is great access in that type of way, but it's hard to confront some of the religious beliefs that don't align with our university values.
That's been a university level thing, because the health systems, there's been discussion and conflict on that, and on religiously affiliated health systems that don't permit certain procedures, and whether or not it's appropriate for us to be sending our students to those systems because they don't conform, more globally with the UC mission and vision. And so it's not an easy answer, but it's a widespread concern.
I'm not sure if any of the panelists would like to answer that, but I also think we could broaden the question even sort of in terms of partnering with groups that may not be in alignment with other ethical concerns that you have. And so any experience from the panel around those concerns?
Well, we don't. We just don't. I mean, if you have any questions about the ethical behavior of a partner, you probably shouldn't be collaborating with
them. We have a kind of an interesting variation on that. It's not so much an institution like a hospital or a religious-based organization, but Nepal has, as does the United States, very rigid, racialized hierarchies, and in Nepal, inclusive caste hierarchies. So in the village that we work, there's sort of one dominant ethnic group. And then there are these historically marginalized Dalit castes. And so we have to work really hard not to kind of have our group captured by the dominant ethnicities and dominant castes, and kind of work pretty hard to ensure that we're working across the board with all different groups. So sometimes it makes some of our more dominant caste hosts a little uncomfortable, but that we believe that that's crucial, and so we do it in as a humble and gracious, compassionate way possible. But we say we are going to work with the range of people here. This is an important value of ours, to be equal access. So it's an interesting variation on the cultural humility in a way. Like we have to bring in a value which isn't necessarily as comfortable to everyone, but it aligns with what we believe in. But I will say, last time we worked with the Dalit homestay group, and that actually created much more of a collaboration between some of the dominant castes and the Dalit caste groups to take on these projects together. So we weren't trying to do social engineering, but there was kind of a positive effect from that.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Laura's and Gordon's question, which I think is really important and shouldn't be dismissed very lightly. I think that at least in some places, there's only one hospital or one clinic that is giving healthcare to a community, and they might be religiously affiliated, and we need to have a relationship with them, and we're not there to kind of change the kinds of dicta that or doctrine that they're following. But I think one of the things that we can consider is how do we build capacity so that others might provide healthcare that goes perhaps more in our way of thinking, perhaps not in those terms, but perhaps like they can provide reproductive health care, that they will provide health care to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. And so it's about thinking right now, these are the barriers that exist, but how can we leverage, how can we provide certain resources that might change that and might allow others to provide that healthcare at this time. And so I think that is, especially at a R1 with so many kinds of, we are a network, we can provide a network, and then how we can use that to change that right now is like, there's just one person, they have this, and they can monopolize, and then we can change that.
Yeah, I think actually this is a extremely important conversation, and conversation that is not taking place frequently enough, because if we're going to not talk openly about this dilemma, then I think we hurting, actually, especially as educators, we hurting the next generations very much, because one role that we might want to play is actually to have these conversations, to open up, to give the tools to our students, how to answer these questions, what to say, how do you create your own positionality, how do you become empowered enough that you are ready to say what you believe, and do. And this is, given what's geopolitically going in this country, around the world, I think this is more and more critical, that we equipped our students with tools, how to handle those very difficult conversations and how to unpack. Because like Natalia was saying, there's one hospital, right? So is that means that certain group, certain population will be denied the access to these services, harming their lives, harming their maybe family members and so on. And yet there is a major ethical dilemma and issue of beliefs and practices and so on. And in my own work, I often raise the issue of what is very often used by political leaders to put sanctions on the country. And sanctions put on the country, a lot of times we agree that's great, and that's the political leader asserted themselves and so on. Yet then at the end of the day, most of the time political sanctions do not hurt political leaders, do not hurt political institutions, do not change constitution, they hurt regular people the most. And that's a big dilemma. So if you are privileged and you have a better financial resources, you're gonna not feel those sanctions. If you don't, you're gonna feel these sanctions. So the sanctions then really reproduce inequalities, and the sanctions in many ways are the colonization of a certain form that then hit the people who are already under the stress, duress, marginalized, harm, and so forth. So those are the conversations that, when we're thinking about global learning, when we think about global awareness, that's exactly the kind of conversation that we do need to have in all kind of different forms.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I'm sure we could keep going on about this for a while. I think I had told the panel we would wrap up the panel around now, but I wanted to give Paulina a chance for the last word on this topic, or another word, because we didn't hear your voice for a little while in those questions. So anything to add, Paulina, as we close the panel?
So I feel like the global experience for students is always in conflict with the funding issues and accessibility. And I think that it's great that there is always not a backup plan. It's like a real plan to harness our own diversity as a university. And I feel like those kind of little changes could really, make it. And for example, in Australia, there was Harmony Day, and it was established by the government in March. Every March, you will have a cultural awareness, and it's kind of a celebration of the diversity compacted in one day, but for the whole country, for every workplace, even daycares. My son was there, they will have Harmony Day. So I feel like those kind of little actions can go a long way, and you already put the seed there. I feel like if I go back in my career, for me, once I was open to the world, I can't go back. I can't be the same person. I can't even go back to Chile and fit in the same way and live the same life I was living before. So I think it is mostly to harness our diversity here, to put that seed for global citizenship. So I guess concrete examples for me would be have a day of someone mentioned also cultural cafes that are great, like have a day to harness the diversity in their own classroom. There are so many international students, but if you see many of them, I can see it as well as an international scholar, groups of people, they don't really intermix all the time in personal life. So there is not really a chance to learn from other cultures. Other examples that I used to use, for example, in Australia, in molecular biology, as I mentioned, is like, we are not social sciences. We can't really do many projects. It's like you teach a formula, you teach genetics, and how can you link it? And I used to tell the students, oh, this professor from Malaysia is working on the mechanism in mitochondria, and try to put that in the context. Achievements of international people in our community that I wanted to put in the spotlight, or the same way that we are seeing, in the spotlight now, Black scientists in chemistry and so on. Just try to bring these conversations. For example, people here never remember in my field. I always tell them Pablo Valenzuela is a person from Chile that was the one in UCSF that discovered hepatitis C virus. And he was the first one creating a recombinant vaccine for hepatitis V. this is one of the poster child stories in patents for the UC system, but we never talk about the person behind it and how his contribution as a foreign scholar, made a global contribution. And also for finishing, when they said read up papers about other countries, we can use the knowledge produced by other countries too. If there is a lot of inbreeding in the US, you see it in the conferences. Every talk, that keynote speaker that you see in a conference is always from the same universities, the same pedigree, academic pedigree. So I think it is important to show the students the knowledge that is produced everywhere else. And in that way, we can start, making these changes.
Thank you so much. And I would just like everybody to join me in thanking the panel for this really interesting and thought-provoking discussion. So feel free to clap or use your emojis in Zoom. And panelists, we really appreciate you being here. We invite you to stay for the next few minutes as we wrap up, but we also understand if you need to log off. The last thing that we need to do as a group is just one more opportunity for reflection. So if you would like to go back to that Jamboard link and back to that page 7 of the Jamboard slides where you were starting to put sticky notes on there about your course or courses, we're just going to give you a few minutes. You can add something now that you've had a discussion about the paper. We've had a discussion about the global learning goals, and we've had the panel discussion. So there's sort of 3 parts to this. Is there something that you're now inspired to add to your class? And so maybe add a sticky, but also spend a little time reflecting on other people's comments. So if there is something that you really love, maybe draw a check mark or a heart or a star next to it using the pen tools in Jamboard. And so we get to sort of see you respond and reflect to other sticky notes. So we'll just spend about 2-ish minutes reflecting, responding silently. You're welcome to turn off your video if you would like. Okay, there's lots of wonderful reflecting and stars and checks happening on the stickies. It's great to see. You can see what resonates with people. And maybe that will inspire you to come back and incorporate some of those really resonant things into your courses. I think now I'm handing to Ingrid for a moment for a few announcements. And then Ingrid, if you'll pass back to me at the very end, that would be wonderful.
I will be happy to do that. So if you are someone for whom this topic really resonated today, I just wanted to share that we have a couple additional resources between global affairs and public scholarship and engagement that some of you have already participated in, but may be new to others. And those include 2 faculty fellows programs that Keith mentioned that PSE runs, which is the Community Engaged Learning Faculty Fellows Program and the Public Scholars Faculty Fellows Program. And then both global affairs and public scholarship and engagement are launching or have launched clusters for developing first-year seminars on the themes of either global learning or community engaged learning. So that is something that we would like to support you in exploring as well as an option. And Aliki and Elizabeth, I don't actually know who in here is part of the curriculum enhancement program, but for those of you who are not, that is the program of which this workshop is a part. So I'm going to post a link to a sign-up form. And if you would like more information about any of those programs, please fill it out and one of us will follow up with you. And Tessa, back to you.
Ingrid, you can I'll also grab it and I can put it in the Canvas site for the curriculum enhancement.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. The last thing I want to do is just thank all of you for your participation and lively discussion, and in particular, thank our panel again, of course, but also Ingrid and Patsy for co-facilitating, and Liz and Aliki for inviting us to all do this together. And I think with that, I'm handing back to Liz and Aliki.
Yeah, so it's going to continue the thank yous. I'd like to thank Tessa and Patsy and Ingrid for facilitating what was a really interesting workshop. And both thoughtful. I have a series of questions I'm going away with, but also Jamboard, wow. I would also like to thank Global Affairs and Public Scholarship and Engagement for co-sponsoring the event. And finally, so that you are aware, a recording of the workshop is going to be made available. It will likely be posted on the Curriculum Enhancement through Global Learning website. And once it's up, we'll send all of you a link that you can then turn your friends to if they'd like to see what it is that's happened within the workshop. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of Aliki and myself for joining us today for what was really an enjoyable, informative, and for me, certainly sending me away with some really big things to think about. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Happy Friday.
Thank you.
Happy Friday,
Thanks,
folks.
everyone. Enjoy your weekend.